Well, it's great to be here today. I think it is my first trip to this building, and to speak to you, I appreciate the opportunity. I also appreciate this opportunity in the legal world. And I'd like to begin by extending my appreciation to Senator DeMint and everyone else at the Heritage Foundation for helping organize this event and for being a leading voice in the conservative movement across the country. And many of you may know that in Texas, we have an organization that took its inspiration from Heritage, Texas Public Policy Foundation, and they played a huge role in making Texas the success story it's become. And I certainly worked with them for the last 12 years, and they've made a major difference in my legislative career. So thank you all for working with them as well. So the movement that you're actively leading extends far beyond the Beltway, improving the lives of people not just in Texas, not just in Washington, but across the country. Thomas Jefferson, who was the founder of the university I went to for law school, once described the ideal government as so divided and balanced among general bodies of magistracy as that no one could transcend their legal limits without being effectually checked and restrained by others. Or as James Madison put it, the accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary, in the same hands, whether of one, a few, or many, and whether hereditary, self-appointed, or elective, may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny. The good news is separation of powers and checks and balances remains the law of the land. The bad news is there are increasingly fewer people who seem to believe in that. That's disconcerting during a time when the President of the United States is attempting to end-run Congress to impose and implement his own immigration laws. That's not all what the country is about. Our country was founded on separation of powers, 3 branches of government, each performing their duties as best they can, working in tandem to make our country better for all of us. No one branch was intended to dominate the others. And I understand that can be very frustrating as a member of the legislature. I know how that is. But sometimes, let me give you a quote. Sometimes when I talk to immigration advocates, they wish you could just bypass Congress and change the law. But that's not how a democracy works. Oddly enough, that's not my words. I took that from President Obama, who said that in May of 2011. Also, a quote, administratively, we can't ignore the law. The fact of the matter is there are laws on the books that have to be enforced. You all know who said that. President Obama said that also in 2011. I can make light of how he's made a complete 180-degree shift in his thinking on this, but it's actually very troubling. Because nothing changed in the law between the time he was correctly noting the limits of his power and the time more recently when he decided he could do whatever he wanted. Other than the makeup of Congress, perhaps, but that can't be a factor when we define what a president can and cannot do. You can begin to see what the president is really up against as he tries to sell the courts and the American people on the idea that he can arbitrarily rewrite the laws whenever he likes. That's a big reason the lawsuit Texas is leading now includes more than half the states in the union, which is fairly remarkable and maybe unprecedented. They realize his amnesty program is awful public policy, but even more than that, they rightfully reject the idea of the executive branch hijacking the legislative process. Now, in Texas, we are facing major repercussions if this policy comes to fruition. You may remember that last summer we had a massive influx of illegal immigrants crossing the border in Texas, many of them children seeking to take advantage of President Obama's previous change in the law, which occurred in 2012. As we look down the barrel of this new, wide-ranging amnesty program, we have to keep in mind the massive effects this will have on our states moving forward. As President Obama continues imposing new laws to attract and retain illegal immigrants, states will have to pay more for education, health care, public safety, and the list goes on and on. In fact, Texas itself has had to beef up our border security since last June, spending more than $100 million of our taxpayers' dollars to increase law enforcement presence along the border since that time. Governor Perry even deployed the National Guard to help the overwhelmed Border Patrol, who were too busy dealing with unaccompanied minors to dedicate attention to keeping others out. Now we're looking at the prospect of a repeat of all of that, or even worse, should President Obama's actions be allowed to stand. Our new governor, Governor Abbott, who was a former Attorney General of Texas, it's worth reminding everyone, launched our lawsuit back when he was Attorney General in December, is solidifying plans to continue defending our border for as long as it takes. But Texas is not alone, and I'm thankful to have Doug here today. Every state would bear some of the weight of this decision. Again, a decision made by one man with no input from the states and no input from Congress. The question before us is whether any president should have the authority to circumvent Congress whenever a legislative battle proves too challenging. Texas and 25 other states have come together to say, with one voice, that this is fundamentally wrong and entirely unacceptable. Last week, a federal judge agreed with us, and I know you spoke of this, and stopped this program in its tracks a mere day before paperwork would be processed and people who a day earlier would have been required to be deported would be invited to stay indefinitely. I'd like to read a couple of excerpts from the ruling, if I may. Usually these things are a little dry, but these ones are pretty good, and this is from the judge. The DAPA program clearly represents a substantive change in immigration policy. If anything, it contradicts the Immigration and Nationality Act. It is, in effect, a new law. That's from our judge. He also said the states assert that the government has abandoned its duty to enforce the law, and this assertion cannot be disputed. One more quote. This court finds that, directly interested or not, the public interest factor that weighs the heaviest is ensuring the actions of the executive branch comply with this country's law and its constitution. Now think about that for a second. A judge has had to actually say that the executive branch should comply with the Constitution. He also went on at length about how this program, once enacted, would be next to impossible to reverse, and I believe that. That actually makes the administration motion earlier this week asking for a stay so they could begin implementing this program not only disingenuous, but also devious. They're well aware that the second they begin running the paperwork, it's effectively game over, and the states will be at the mercy of the administration. Of course, that seems to be the way that President Obama prefers it. It is worth noting, by the way, that President Obama's action effectively allows millions of illegal aliens to cut to the front of the line in front of people who have been patiently waiting their turn to come to America the right way. There's a long way to go between here and there. However, we are firm believers in our arguments and the President's arguments, depending on when he makes them. Any of you who have spent much time in Washington, I imagine most of you here have, understand how the uncertainty that is our federal system. You know what panel, you never know what panel you'll be assigned. You never know what group of judges you're going to end up with. However, we're confident because we're on the right side of this argument, and we'll make the case as far as we have to. We're going to make the case because we're believers in the rule of law, and we understand the importance of preserving it. The rule of law, in fact, is what has always separated America from the rest of the world. Our founding fathers had just witnessed what happens when a monarch with unchecked powers asserted his will on his subjects, and they crafted a system to protect that from happening again. At the heart of it was the rule of law. The rule of law means not everybody gets what they want. The rule of law means that sometimes you have to live with the outcomes you may not like. Regardless, though, you follow the law, and for nearly 2.5 centuries, that's helped maintain our nation's status as a bastion of freedom and liberty for all. Once you undercut the rule of law, you dramatically weaken the foundation of the greatest democracy the world has ever seen. Even if the president thinks he's doing it for good reasons, we profoundly disagree with the president in this case. He runs the risk of undermining the beauty and genius of our system. The irony, of course, is that many of the immigrants coming here are coming here because they're fleeing the kinds of places where the rule of law doesn't exist or is ignored by the people in power. In any system of government, the rule of law is what stands between freedom and tyranny, and we can't afford to waver in that defense. The president's actions run counter to the principles established by our founding fathers and would cause significant, potentially irrevocable damage to the system of checks and balances that are the foundation of our entire system of government. In Texas, we'll continue to fight for the rule of law and the blessings of liberty that it provides. Once again, thank you all for being here today, and I want to thank Doug Peterson from Nebraska, one of my new colleagues, for joining me here as well. So thank you all. Look forward to taking your questions.